1-800-522-4700 and 800-GAM. One call or text away. September was both Recovery Month and Suicide Prevention Month, two observances that highlight hope, resilience, and the life-saving importance of support. In this special episode, we explore the often overlooked connection between gambling and suicide, a link that remains hidden to many but is devastatingly real for those struggling. We'll discuss how gambling helplines not only connect people with treatment resources, but often act as suicide prevention lifelines for those in crisis. We'll also address the current state of the National Problem Gambling Helpline, including the recent court order decision impacting access to 1-800-GAMBLER and the transition to 1-800-522-4700 as the active national number. This episode emphasizes why helplines matter, what resources are available, and how we can continue to break stigma while ensuring people have a place to turn when they need it most.
This is Talking Addiction and Recovery, the podcast talking, you guessed it, all about addiction and recovery. Join your host, licensed professional counselor Andrew J. Schreier, as he and his guests break down recovery topics with raw honesty, delving into niche conversations around the topics of substance abuse, mental health, and gambling. We intend to meet individuals where they are on their own personal journey of recovery, with dignity, respect, and compassion. We'll do more than talk addiction and recovery. We'll explore it. We're glad you've joined us. Here with today's episode, your host, Andrew Schreier.
Welcome back to Talking Addiction and Recovery podcast. And today is a special episode. It was really unplanned, and we'll talk a little bit more about why that happened and what was going on. But it's important. And as some recent events and updates were happening regarding the National Helpline and gambling has changed, we're going to talk about it in the episode, but not to dig into why it happened or any finger pointing, but talk mostly about the changes and what we need to do in order to make sure valuable resources to those impacted by gambling are still available. It's October 1st, and September was both National Recovery Month and Suicide Prevention Month. And these two observances remind us of hope, resilience, and the life-saving impact of connection. But there's a piece of this conversation that's often overlooked, which is the connection between gambling and suicide. That's what we're going to talk about today, along with the critical role of helplines and some important updates about how people can access help right now. When most people think about suicide prevention, they think of depression, trauma, and even substance use. What many people don't realize is that gambling disorder has one of the highest suicide attempt rates of all addictions. I presented at the Crisis Conference this past month and was fortunate to be selected to talk about gambling and suicide. Earlier in the year, I submitted a proposal at a Prevent Suicide conference and was thankful to get selected to present on gambling and suicide at both conferences, which was, focusing on crisis and suicide prevention. The organizers acknowledged never having gambling-related breakout sessions or topics. Now, I'm not shaking my head in disappointment because that's what happens a lot. I thanked each of them for selecting the breakout session because most people do not. Gambling is one that gets pushed aside. It gets denied because it's not seen as something concerning or worrisome. Even when it might be, there is also a talk of there's other things we need to deal with. There's other issues going on that gambling is not among the priorities. So I make it a habit when I do get selected for a conference that's not a specific gambling related conference, and it is about gambling, to thank the organizers for allowing that opportunity, making that decision, because that usually means they are denying someone else's proposal and they're selecting this one. But I don't want them to think that I'm disapproval of them or scolding them for not including it. I want to thank them for that opportunity, the seat at the table. So if you look in areas related to suicide prevention or crisis prevention, it's not common that you'll find topics about gamblings and trainings, breakouts, and webinars, things like that. People struggling with gambling often feel overwhelmed by the debt that is occurring, shame, and isolation. Gambling can be hidden for several years, which means by the time it does surface, the emotional toll is quite enormous and overwhelming. And a lot of times when that happens, it's a pretty significant roller coaster with some high peaks and some really fast drops because you have someone who might be desperate and they might be thinking that this next gamble they place or bet they make is what could help erase the debt they're in or solve the problems that's going on. And there's that anticipation of what the outcome's going to be. Dopamine rises pretty significantly. And then very quickly, a roll of a dice, a flip of a card, playing a game, and all of a sudden it can be a quick change, a drop to hopeless and don't know what to do, and even further desperation. So a lot of people with gambling suffer in silence, believing that there might be no way out, or even believing that suicide may be the answer to the financial and emotional turmoil that is happening. This is why it's so critical to bring gambling into the conversation when we talk about suicide prevention. And helplines are more than just numbers. They're lifelines. For gambling, it's important to know that they don't dedicate themselves to suicide prevention or crisis helplines. Their focus is mostly aimed at connecting people with treatment and resources, connecting them to places where they can seek further care, seek help. It could be support groups in the area, it could be a counselor who is near to them, it could be some education on learning more about gambling, whatever it might be, it's to connect them with some resources and some treatment. However, that being said, they often do function as suicide and crisis prevention support. Why? Well, close to 80% of those who call a gambling helpline have suicidal thoughts. Many calls to gambling helplines aren't just about, hey, where can I find a counselor? They're about people who are struggling, who may be on the edge, who feel like their situation is hopeless, that there's nothing else that they can do. I've heard several stories from staff members and even volunteers who are taking phone calls and answering chat messages and text from someone who has a gun in their hand or standing on a railroad track. Staff are trained to de-escalate, to listen, and to connect callers to immediate help. But if you ever talk to a staff member or volunteer, a lot of them have volunteers for these helplines. A lot of the time, they are dealing with crisis and someone who is having suicidal thoughts or who may be actively suicidal, who may have a plan. That's what leads us to making sure people are aware of the connection of gambling and suicide, but it's vital that people have access to this helpline information. And that's what leads us to the most recent developments in the National Helpline for Gambling, because there was, for the past 3 years, the National Problem Gambling Helpline has been accessible through the well-known number 1-800-GAMBLER, and it became the go-to number for a lot of individuals and families nationwide. A lot of states also have local numbers, and there's a whole way that works when you're calling it and connecting you to places. And this has been functioning for the past 3 years, that the National Problem Gambling Helpline has been making itself more known, more aware. We've been seeing it promoted with campaigns and awareness. But as of Monday, this Monday, September 29th, the New Jersey Supreme Court denied an emergency stay that would have allowed the National Council on Problem Gambling, the NCPG, to continue using 1-800-GAMBLER as the national number. And this is a major shift, and unfortunately, it can cause confusion at a time when clarity matters most. There's been a lot of work to get 1-800-GAMBLER out and around. I know in recent weeks and months, there were things we were doing just within our organization that, we updated our patient handbook with resources, and one of those added was the gambling helpline. We created a weekly topic that was about understanding problem gambling, and part of that handout had the national helpline information for people to call. And just recently, I received a message from our smartphone app developer with a screenshot she was sharing with me about adding the national helpline number to the app's helpline page, where in the app, individuals can just go into the helpline and touch a button and get contacted to these numbers. And what I've been doing is a drop of water in a large body of water for what others have done to make 1-800-GAMBLER accessible to people who are to be awareness and let people know the number they can call. So what I've been doing, either just talking about it, presenting, getting numbers added, still bothering Apple TV to add gambling to their Here to Help page. But there's so many people who have worked really hard to get this number known, to increase awareness. I think that's where a lot of people have just been taken back a little bit, that all this work that was being done, all the efforts to make it awareness through materials and awareness campaigns and everything from stickers to posting numbers online and all the ways in which people do it, that this was a little bit of like a little bit of a blow to just that momentum and movement that we were seeing to increase that numbers awareness. So it's really important is here's what we need to know. So as of September 29th at 11:59 p.m., the National Problem Gambling Helpline is now operating under 1-800-522-4700. I'm going to say it again, 1-800-522-4700. This number will connect callers with support and local resources, just as 1-800-GAMBLER did. NCPG released a statement saying that they remain committed to supporting individuals and families, and they're working on a long-term solution to safeguard access to help. It's important for us to share this number widely. And say it again, 1-800-522-4700. They released some helpful information and new promotional kits, which I will make available in the podcast notes. So what can we do? And this was, since this happened, you've been following it, there's been news articles, there's been postings made, there's been updates released by the NCPG, and, things were kind of escalating in the last couple days, leading up to court decisions and appeals and trying to keep it going to have the number still functioning in the capacity that it was. For a little bit of this, it was frustrating. It was, this helpless feeling of just got, this number out there, we're promoting it, we're getting it awareness, and then boom, like now it changes. But I think when you take a little bit of an obstacle as the way approach is, now that this number has changed, let's use this to have the conversations about awareness of the number. Now we can use this as a talking point. We can use this as a reason to re-engage with people, to talk about the number and make it more accessible. So how can we do that? First, help spread awareness of the new helpline number. Someone you know is struggling with gambling, or you yourself may be, make sure that you know and they know the number, 1-800-522-4700. Second, remember that the helpline is not the only resource available for seeking support and services. This was a really helpful reminder for me that I needed when I was on a meeting that was talking about all this, when someone mentioned that the helpline phone number is not the lone tool support that we have. We got a couple in the box. So it may have been seen as the major one, but there is also text options, which is 800 GAM, 800 GAM. There's also a chat feature on the website, which is ncpggambling.org/chat. We've got to remember that there are several ways, different connection options, that it's not just one phone number. It is other available methods to connect people to resources and treatment. So there's the phone number, there's text, and there's chat. Third, while we focus on providing the national resources, we also can't forget the local ones as well. This isn't about one number overshadowing the others, but making all numbers and resources available. So for my state of Wisconsin, which I live and provide services in, that information is they have a helpline, they have a text, they have a chat. Their helpline number is 1-800-GAMBLE-5. Their text is 850-888-HOPE. You can visit their website to access their chat feature. So let's make sure that we aren't reliant on just one resource for people. Sometimes people don't have other resources. That's why the national one is really important, because not all states have their own designated numbers. But let's not forget that some states do. And we should make local resources and national ones available for people to contact and connect with. Fourth, don't forget about the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 988. Both numbers are available 24/7, confidential, and free. It's really important because when we have individuals who may be struggling with gambling and they may be having suicidal thoughts, they may, have plans, that 988 is an option as well. And talking with some people, uh, calling the gambling number versus a crisis and suicide prevention lifeline is that there's this feeling that that's not for them, that the gambling one is, and I think there's, some shame going on. I think there's some, lack of confidence in believing that if someone calls a 988 line, are they able to talk about gambling? Do they know what's going on with it? Can they have those conversations? So, but it's important to know that that resource is also available. And fifth, let's continue breaking stigma. Talking about gambling and suicide openly is the first step towards letting people know there are resources, there is help, and why a lot of us should have this information readily available, why we should have it posted among the other numbers, why it deserves a seat at the table among the other helplines and resources. We do that by talking about the connection with gambling and suicide and the reason for it needing to have access, just like all the other numbers. We're not asking for numbers to get pushed out so that it can have space, but make a little bit of a room for a population that has a strong connection with suicide. So it was hard to, there's a couple of, hard to think this has just happened in such a short amount of days, even though there's been things talked about for a little bit. And there's, like I said, there's been news articles, social media postings, there's been some meetings and some releases about what was happening. But it does feel like in a short amount of days, it went from this is the well-known number that everyone knows to now we're changing a number. And part of it was like, what are we going to do? But these are things that we can do. We can own up to it and make sure that people know the number. We can re-engage in conversations. We can talk about why this number is important. So with all the things that got in the way and all the things that became barriers, and now we can use that to break through it. Now we can use those to build more connections. So remember that recovery is possible. We need to make sure that message is known to those who are impacted by gambling or struggling with gambling. Support is available. Reaching out is a sign of strength, not weakness. We need to make sure these resources are available and known. So the moment someone does call, text, or chat, we are available. We cannot allow a gap in that care and support. As we continue to honor recovery and suicide prevention, even after September, let's not forget the many people silently struggling with gambling and its impact. If you or someone you know needs help, call 1-800-522-4700 for gambling support or text. You can text 800 GAM. Or if you're in an immediate crisis and struggling, you can call 988. You don't have to go through this alone. Thanks for joining me for this special episode of Talking Addiction and Recovery podcast. Please share this episode, and more importantly, share these numbers. I know I have to get to work on getting these numbers updated, but it's worth it knowing the impact it will have on someone reaching out. You never know whose life you may be helping. And that phone call, that message, that chat can be the first opportunity we do have to connect with them.
You've been listening to Talking Addiction and Recovery with Andrew J. Schreier. We're so glad you've joined us and invite you to connect further with the show and these topics at www.andrewjschreier.com. That's Andrew J. SCHREIER.com. You can also email us directly at talkingaddictionandrecovery@gmail.com and connect on social media, Instagram at Talking Addiction and Recovery, Facebook Talking Addiction and Recovery Podcast, and Twitter at TalkAR_podcast. To stay connected and never miss an episode, be sure to like, rate, and subscribe. Until next time, friends, let's keep talking addiction and recovery.